Hey everyone, I got a great question today from one of the athletes I'm coaching that is training for a half Ironman race. And my answer really applies to everyone, regardless if they're doing a sprint distance race, Olympic, half Ironman, even up to Ironman. It's a really great question. They're going out to purchase a bike and they want to know, should they get a tri bike or should they get a road bike? And then more specifically, they ask, should they just buy a road bike, maybe like a lower end one, and then maybe buy a tri bike later. So we're gonna I'll get into a lot of the pros and cons of the two. It's definitely not a simple yes or no answer, but hopefully after this video you'll have an idea of what's right for you. So first thing you want to do is you want to establish your budget. And why is that? It's sort of like an automobile. The minute you buy, especially if it's a retail brand new bike, the minute you buy that bike and walk out of the store, it's lost maybe not half its value, but 60%, 40% of its value. And you think about it, like if you buy a bike for, let's say, $3,000, which can sound really expensive to you, or that might sound cheap, but I'm just going to use $3,000, and you walk out of the store with it, and you decide, I don't really like cycling anymore, and you think, I'm going to sell this bike. I just paid $3,000 for it last week. Well, who's going to pay you $3,000 when they could go to the store and get it? And then they would have service from the store and they have a relationship, and they could also maybe return it at the store, right? So the minute you buy your bike, it's just lost its value. And when it comes to buying a bike, say off Craigslist or from a friend, it's much better if you know the person personally, so you can get an idea of how the bike has been cared for. Just recently I have an athlete who got a great deal on a bike. Bike was a little bit older, didn't necessarily fit her perfectly, so she had to spend money changing out the stem, changing out some things so it fit better, and then the shifting was total crap, and that's because it hadn't been maintained, and so she just probably had to put a new cassette on the back, a new chain ring, as well as a chain, and so I'm sure that must have cost her over $100. And so all of a sudden that great used deal, because you have to maybe put some money in it to fix it up, isn't such a great deal after all. And then if you're buying a carbon bike, really make sure, unless you know a lot about bikes, that you can take that bike to a bike shop and have them inspect it, because carbon, it can crack fairly easily if it's mistreated. And trust me, you don't want to buy a bike that has a cracked frame on it. Another friend of mine did that. Luckily, he was able to pay a couple $100 to get the carbon frame repaired, but he had basically given someone $1,500 and almost had a very much not usable bike. And I'm pretty confident the person who sold it to him knew that it had a crack in the frame, because it was like a $4,000 bike. So my friend thought he was getting a good deal. Ended up he was able to fix it, but kind of a bad situation. So be careful there. Establish your budget. Think about how much you want to spend, and then really buy as much bike as you can, because it's probably going to be a while before you buy another bike. And then save room for extras. So if you don't have a helmet, figure out how much you want to spend on a helmet. Cycling shoes with pedals and then cleats, so the two match up to each other. A frame pump or CO2, a flat kit so you can repair a flat tire, a floor pump so you can pump up your tires before you go riding. When I bought my first bike, I had like $700. I went into the bike shop, bought a bike. It was I think it was actually more than $700, but they gave me a little bit off. And then after I bought the bike, the guy's like, hey, do you have a helmet? I'm like, no. And then, do you have shoes? No. And I, pretty much maxed out my budget. So it was a little bit shocking and, just not really knowing. It's like, oh yeah, I had to spend another $100 that I didn't have on some of that stuff, right? So think about the extras. Another popular question is, can you do an Ironman on a road bike? Absolutely, yes. And I have 3 stories for you about that. So ironically, my fastest Ironman bike split, which was just under 5 hours, 30 minutes, came on a road bike. It was that first road bike I bought. It was my second Ironman, and it was a Trek road bike, $700, aluminum frame. I had some clip-on aero bars. So part of the reason that was my fastest Ironman split really had nothing to do with the bike. It just was that was the time when I was in my best shape. And so that coincided with my fastest bike split. In the years that followed, twice I upgraded my bike, but by the time I had done my next Ironman, I was 3 or 4 years older, and maybe the fitness wasn't there, and so my bike splits got a little bit slower each time I upgraded the bike. But it doesn't have as much to do with the bike as it does to do with the engine, and that's you, the person, and the amount of training that you do. And then, so that's my story. Several athletes that I've coached to their first Ironman did the Ironman on a road bike with clip-on aero bars. It's extremely common, especially, like, I'm a huge Cervelo fan, so a lot of their aero road bikes are very easy to turn into a tri-bike. Not necessarily the same geometry as a tri-bike, but easier than some other bikes. But pretty much any road bike can be turned into a triathlon position. I have a friend who's a phenomenal athlete. He's a really phenomenal cyclist. He went, I think it was, he did like 4 hours, 45 minutes in a half Ironman, which is really pretty fast. He's a road bike guy. He did the bike on a road bike, no aero bars, and I think he biked 2:24, which is really fast. It was part of the reason why he had a 4:45 total time. So plenty of stories of people who have done an Ironman on a road bike, and you can too. So what are the differences between a triathlon bike and a road bike? Well, the biggest thing is the position. The seat tube on a tri-bike is steeper because that puts you more forward so you can be in the aero position. And the shifting is very different. On a tri-bike, the shifting is going to be at the end of the aero bars, which is great when you're riding in aero position and you want to shift because it's right there. It also means when you want to brake, you have to take a hand off and brake, okay? Now that's the opposite of a road bike. The nice thing about a road bike, especially if you're new to cycling, is the shifting and the braking is all right there in the brake hoods. So you can shift and brake at the same time. Now when you put clip-on aero bars on your road bike, you're now in aero bars and you don't have the ability to shift. You can build that in, but it's going to be a bit expensive. So if you're in your aero position and you want to shift or brake, you have to take your hands off to shift or brake. So it could be here and you maybe want to shift. So some people might find that annoying. So those are some of the trade-offs that you're just naturally going to have to make. A big one though is in positioning and comfort. So if I'm going out for a ride with friends and it's more of a social ride, I'll take my road bike. If you're in the sport long enough, you probably have a road bike and a triathlon bike. The reason for that is triathlon bikes really are comfortable when you're here in the aero position, and they're really uncomfortable when you're here on the outsides of the bars. And a lot of that is just because of the seat tube angle and where it puts you. So when you have all your weight here on a tri-bike, it's really not comfortable. If you're doing a lot of city riding where you're, stop signs and stop lights, you're going to be more comfortable on a road bike than you are on a triathlon bike. But if you're out, if you live maybe out in the country or rural areas where there's not a lot of stopping, then a tri-bike, it'd be much easier to get in that position and go. Okay. Handling is a big one. So if you're new to cycling, then you probably have fairly poor bike handling skills. And what do I mean by bike handling skills? We're talking about descending, we're talking about climbing, especially turning, shifting your body weight to turn the bike. Triathlon bikes are very twitchy in the front, and a lot of that is because the weight balance is forward on the bike, and so the handling is pretty twitchy compared to a road bike, where it's just easier to steer and turn a road bike than it is a tri-bike. So when you're new to cycling, you really want the advantages of a road bike, because learning these things is challenging enough. Doing it on a tri-bike then sort of compounds that problem. But that doesn't mean you can't get a tri-bike for your first ever bike. That's just one of the differences. So and then how much group riding versus solo riding. If you're doing a lot of group rides and you're on your tri-bike, you probably won't be in the aero position very much. One, it's not that safe, and two, it's not that safe. That's really what it comes down to. So you have better braking and handling when you're out here. So if you're riding with a lot of people, you probably won't be in the aero position that much. Not to say that a group of triathletes can't go out on a bike ride and all of them be riding in the aero position, but there's generally more spacing as opposed to riding in bunches. But if you're new to riding, you're probably very nervous to ride, anywhere within 5 feet of someone anyway, so that's fine to be in the aero position. But as you become a better cyclist, you can work on tightening that gap so you can ride really close to people. And then the other question I would ask is, how much racing are you planning on doing? if this is a bucket list item and you're gonna do one triathlon, one big triathlon, and maybe that's it, maybe do one a year even, I would say you probably should get a road bike because the rest of your riding will be more comfortable. If you love triathlon and you want to do a lot of races, then you might be better off getting a tri bike, right? To be more specific. And then the big thing is going to be competitiveness. How competitive are you? If you're just out there to finish and have a good time, get a road bike. If you're thinking about you want to win your age group or place in your age group or qualify for Kona or some big monumental goal, then you probably should get a tri bike because they definitely are faster than a road bike. But one thing, especially for Ironman, sometimes people get a tri bike and they get a really aggressive aero position, but they don't have the flexibility in the low back or the core strength or even ride that much in that position, and they don't stay in that position. So if you have a tri bike and you're not riding it in the aero position, you're really at a disadvantage compared to a road bike. And the same thing just in terms of aero position fit. Don't let a bike shop talk you into too aggressive of a fit if you can't hold it, and especially on a longer distance race. On a shorter distance race, you probably can hold that aggressive position just because you're not in the position long enough. If you're doing an Olympic distance and you're pretty fast, you're maybe going to be on the bike hour and 5, hour and 20 minutes. That's a lot shorter than a 2:45, 3-hour bike ride for a half Ironman or a 5.5, 6, 7-hour bike ride on an Ironman, right? And so you need to change that aero position so that it fits your skill level and your comfort level, not what is theoretically the fastest aero position, right? We need the fastest position that you can hold and that you can maintain, and that'll actually be faster for you than some aggressive position that you can't stay in. If you're riding and you are constantly out of the aero position, then that means that position is not comfortable. If you have a really good aero fit, whether it's on a road bike or a tri bike, you should be able to ride like that for hours on end. If you don't have that set up, then you need to maybe go get a professional bike fit so that you can be comfortable in that position. Okay, so those are the main reasons between tri bike and road bike. Again, you can do any distance triathlon on either. It's just really going to depend on what kind of riding you do, what are your surroundings, how much you ride by yourself versus other people. Definitely want to think about your budget. Bikes have gotten fairly expensive in the last 5 years. $4,000, $3,000 anymore can be on the lower end, which is really kind of sad. And which is why a lot of times people think about buying it used. Just keep in mind, if you're buying it for somebody you never met, ideally, you can meet them at a bike shop, and don't ask the bike shop to do it for free. Ask to pay them. Say, hey, could I pay you a fee that you would look over this bike for me and just tell me that it's there's nothing fundamentally wrong with it. And hopefully they'll do that for you because they would want to establish a relationship because you're going to need bike maintenance. You're going to need new tubes and tires. But some bike shops may not want to do that. Might depend on how busy they are. They might be offended that you're not buying a bike from them. If you have a friend who's been biking a while, maybe you can enlist that friend's help if you're buying a used bike. And if you find the deal that seems too good to be true, it probably is. It's probably either stolen or there's maybe a crack in the carbon frame. So got to be a little bit careful with that buying a used bike. And if you do buy a used bike, you absolutely need to know what size you are, because one of the worst things you could do is buy a bike that's the wrong size for you. Because in most cases, you're never going to get that to fit very well. And then you're not going to really ride as fast or be as comfortable as if you got the right size bike to begin with. So hope that helps clear that up. Any questions, as always, post them in the comment section, and I'll do follow-ups for that. All right, thanks.